There are over 1 billion cows alive on this planet right now, raised for one single purpose. 9 billion chickens get slaughtered every single year in the United States alone. Sheep, pigs, goats, rabbits, deer. Entire global industries built around animals that spend their whole lives eating grass, grain, and leaves. Now, try to remember the last time you saw lion steak on a restaurant menu, or wolf, or eagle. Humans have farmed, hunted, and eaten almost every herbivore on Earth at some point in history. But predators? We've almost never done it. Not at scale, not as a staple, not as a habit. Across nearly every culture, on every continent, completely isolated from each other, with no shared language and no shared religion, humans converged on the exact same unspoken rule. Eat the plant eaters, leave the meat eaters alone. And if you actually stop and think about it, that makes absolutely no sense. A wolf and a cow are both just meat. They are both made of muscle, fat, and protein. Both are completely edible in theory. So why does one show up on nearly every dinner table on the planet, and the other basically never does? The answer isn't just one thing. It is biology, chemistry, and human psychology, all stacking on top of each other, all pointing in the exact same direction. Let's start with the math, because the math alone almost settles this argument by itself. Nature operates on a strict budget, and there is a mathematical tax placed on every single meal on Earth. It is a tax so heavy that no civilization in human history has ever been able to afford it. In 1942, an ecologist named Raymond Lindemann worked out a concept that would later become famously known as the 10% rule. At every single step up a food chain, roughly 90% of the energy gets lost. It gets burned off as body heat, spent on movement, or wasted during digestion. Only about 10% actually survives the climb to the next level. To understand why this ruins the idea of predator meat, let's look at the numbers. Picture a lush field of grass producing 100 pounds of energy. That field can support maybe 10 pounds of a grazing deer, and that 10 pounds of deer can only support about 1 pound of a hunting wolf. To raise a single pound of predator meat, you need 10 pounds of prey animal underneath it. And that 10 pounds of prey needed 100 pounds of plants underneath that. Predators are, by design, the absolute most expensive meat on the planet to produce. Raising a single cow to slaughter weight already takes years of grain, water, and grazing land that most people never even think about. Farming lions for food would basically mean farming animals whose entire diet is other farmed animals. You would have to raise and slaughter 10 times the amount of prey just to keep one carnivore alive long enough to grow to size. No empire, no nation, no modern corporation has ever had that kind of surplus energy to throw away on a single food source. It seems like an open and shut case. Predators cost too much energy. But if you're paying close attention, you might have just realized a massive hole in this theory. What about the tuna? If the 10% rule makes farming predators mathematically impossible, then how do you explain the multi-billion-dollar global seafood industry? Tuna is a predator. Salmon, at least partly, is a predator. A shark in a bowl of fin soup is an apex predator. And yet, nobody blinks at a tuna sandwich. Here is the biological loophole that most people completely miss, and it rewrites the entire equation. The 10% rule is not the exact same 10% for every animal. The math changes completely depending on your blood. Warm-blooded animals, like mammals and birds, burn a massive, almost reckless share of every meal they eat just to keep their internal body temperature constant, day and night, whether they are hungry or resting. Cold-blooded animals, like fish and reptiles, spend almost none of their own energy heating their bodies. The ocean water does that for them. Because of this, cold-blooded animals convert their food into body mass at roughly 10 times the efficiency of warm-blooded animals. That is not a small correction. It is the difference between an animal that is absurd to farm and one that can feed the entire planet. A tuna eating smaller fish is simply not paying the same brutal, fiery energy tax that a wolf pays for eating a deer. The ocean can afford predators in a way the land never could. The rule wasn't really, don't eat predators. The unspoken rule was always, don't eat warm-blooded predators. So the math allows for fish, but bans the wolf. But money and energy are just the beginning. Even if you had unlimited funds to farm a lion, there is something quietly building up inside its meat that money can't fix. Toxins in the environment do not disappear as they move up a food chain. They stack, and the animal sitting at the very top is forced to swallow all of them at once. It's a process called biomagnification, and it is a silent killer. Imagine a small fish absorbs a tiny, almost microscopic trace of mercury from the water around it. A bigger fish eats hundreds of those small fish, absorbing all of that mercury. A larger predator eats hundreds of those bigger fish. By the time you reach the very top of the food chain, you are looking at a creature that has spent its entire life quietly accumulating everybody else's poison. This isn't just a theory. In the 20th century, this exact process nearly wiped the symbol of America off the face of the earth. In the 1940s, a powerful synthetic pesticide called DDT became wildly popular. It washed into rivers, got absorbed by algae, concentrated inside fish, and then concentrated again inside the bald eagles that ate those fish. The DDT didn't kill the adult eagles outright. It did something much more insidious. It altered their calcium metabolism. By the 1960s, the chemical levels inside these apex predators were so incredibly high that it caused their eggshells to thin. When the mother eagles sat on their nests to incubate the next generation, the eggs would literally collapse under her own weight. Bald eagle populations in the continental United States dropped to under 500 nesting pairs before DDT was finally banned. That is what a lifetime at the top of a food chain does to living tissue, whether the toxin is a modern pesticide, lead, or mercury. This is why doctors today strictly tell pregnant women to avoid shark and swordfish. But if you think this is purely a modern problem caused by human pollution, you need to hear what happened to the explorers who tried to eat the oldest predators on Earth. Long before industrial chemicals polluted the rivers, nature had its own way of turning predator meat into poison, and human explorers had to learn it the hardest way imaginable. In the early 20th century, Arctic and Antarctic expeditions were pushing the limits of human survival. Indigenous communities across the ice had known for centuries, purely through ancestral wisdom, never to touch the liver of a polar bear or a sled dog. Western explorers didn't get that memo, and it cost them their lives. In 1911, Douglas Mawson led an Antarctic expedition that went horribly wrong. Stranded, freezing, and entirely out of rations, Mawson and his companion, Xavier Mertz, turned to their last desperate option. They ate their own sled dogs. Muscle, fat, and eventually, the liver. Almost immediately, their bodies began to violently reject it. Mertz began suffering from agonizing stomach cramps. He fell into a state of delirium, biting off his own finger in a fit of madness. Then came the violent headaches. Their skin literally began peeling off their bodies in massive sheets. Mertz slipped into a coma and died, while Mawson barely survived the trek back, his hair falling out, the soles of his feet completely shedding off. So what killed them? It wasn't starvation, and it wasn't the cold. It was the meat, specifically hypervitaminosis A, extreme vitamin A poisoning. Apex predators in extreme environments, like huskies and polar bears, store such an insane, hyper-concentrated amount of vitamin A in their livers to process their purely carnivorous diets that a single meal of it is instantly toxic to a human being. The predator's biology is fundamentally incompatible with ours. Even if we ignore the brutal energy cost, even if we strip away the mercury, the pesticides, and the toxic vitamins, suppose you could farm a predator perfectly safely, you still wouldn't want to eat it because of what a lifetime of murder actually does to a muscle. Prey animals, cows, sheep, deer, mostly graze. They live relatively calm lives, punctuated by brief moments of panic. Predators do not graze. They sprint, stalk, starve, and physically fight for every single calorie they ingest. And that constant, daily violence changes their flesh on a chemical level. That extreme physical stress floods their bodies with cortisol and adrenaline, constantly draining the glycogen that normally makes meat tender when a farm animal is slaughtered peacefully. Food scientists call this DFD, dark, firm, and dry meat. It is tougher, incredibly stringy, and carries a strong, musky, gamey flavor from testosterone-related compounds concentrated deep in the tissue. Hunters who have survived on wolf or mountain lion all say the same thing. It is edible in a true life-or-death emergency, but it tastes terrible. And worse than the taste is what comes riding inside the meat. Predators are nature's garbage disposals. To survive, they specifically target the sick, the old, and the weakest members of a prey population. This means they are directly consuming whatever parasites and pathogens those animals were carrying. Conditions like trichinosis, a dangerous parasitic worm infection, spread specifically through predator and scavenger meat like bear and wild boar. When you eat a carnivore, you aren't just eating flesh. You are eating every infection, every parasite, and everything that was already wrong with the animal it hunted. So the science is overwhelming. Energy, toxicity, taste, and disease all build a massive, invisible wall between us and predator meat. But our ancestors didn't know about the 10% rule. They didn't have microscopes to see trichinosis worms, and they didn't know what biomagnification was. Yet somehow, they figured it out anyway. Culture caught up with biology and made the rule official. In the book of Leviticus, dietary laws explicitly forbid the eating of birds of prey, naming eagles, vultures, and hawks directly. Islamic dietary law draws the exact same boundary, prohibiting the consumption of any terrestrial animal that hunts with fangs or any bird that hunts with talons. Across cultures with absolutely zero contact with each other, from ancient Israel to the Arabian Peninsula to indigenous hunting traditions across the Americas, the exact same line was drawn in the sand. Eat the grazer, spare the hunter. But anthropologists believe this final rule wasn't just about safety or cost. It was about something much deeper in the human psyche. Predators were dangerous. They were our competition. We feared them, we respected them, and in many ancient cultures, we worshipped them. Across dozens of unrelated civilizations, the lion, the eagle, the wolf, and the bear kept showing up as symbols of power, kingship, and divinity. Their skulls sat on chieftains' headdresses. Their statues guarded the gates of grand temples. Their faces were painted onto the shields of empires. You don't put the creature you built a religion around on a barbecue. You respect it. You fear it, because it is incredibly hard to serve dinner out of a god. The reason we don't eat predators was never just one thing. It is biology stacking on top of chemistry, stacking on top of ancient human culture. Predator meat starves the earth to produce. It carries the accumulated poison of 1,000 smaller animals. It tastes like stress, breaks down poorly, and acts as a magnet for disease. We didn't invent the rule that predators don't get eaten. We simply noticed the harsh arithmetic of nature over and over again, in every corner of the world, completely independently, and we built our plates around it. The tuna on your dinner table was never the exception to the rule. It was the clue that explained it. The wolf was never on the menu. The universe decided that millions of years before we even learned how to build a fire.